Hello to everyone who's listening today. I'm Johnny C. Taylor Jr., President and CEO of SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. And today I'm here with a diverse and esteemed panel to talk about reimagining the workplace and putting moms first at work. After all, we're all here because of a mom, right? I'd like to start with each of our three panelists, introducing you to them. First, we have Dave Nichols. Dave is the head of state and local corporate and government relations for EMD Serrano, and David is a father of two. And then we have Blessing Adesian. I love that. Founder and CEO of Mother Honestly. Blessing is a mother of four, and I'm really excited because she is not only here with us today, but she's here with us from Nigeria. Very, very cool. So we have a global panel as well. And then Amy Nelson, who's the founder and board member of The Riveter. Amy's a mother of four, and this group collectively will be able to provide us so much information as we discuss a very important and critical part of our workforce. Here's a fact, though, that I think we should all let kind of settle in. We talk about what happened with a pandemic. As a result of the pandemic, there were some good and there were some not so good things. But here's a fact that most don't know. And we collect this data at the Society for Human Resource Management. We constantly monitor how the workforce has changed. Pre-pandemic, for the first time ever, women made up in the United States a majority of the workforce. It was the first time that we'd ever done it. We have seen such progress, and companies and employers of all types were very, very intentional about making sure that we brought women into the workforce in meaningful numbers and that we promoted women so that they also grew and thrived in the workforce. And then all of a sudden the pandemic occurred. In the 1 year, February 2020 to February of 2021, the American workforce lost 2.3 million women. And that was in 1 year. And what we now know 2 years into this pandemic is that this is stubborn. They're not coming back. And we at places like SHRM, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Department of Labor, we're all trying to figure out what's going on. Why can't we get women back into the workplace? Well, I'll tell you, the biggest culprit is dependent care responsibilities. And we know this. One of that is being a mom, but we also know, because many of us in the sandwich generation, we're also taking care of elderly parents, right? Aging parents. So you have mom and child on both sides, and you're thrust in between. And for good or for bad, women overwhelmingly, Dave, you and I know this, overwhelmingly bear the responsibility of providing for children. And so we really do have to, and it's why this conversation is so timely, we've got to discuss how are moms being impacted by the pandemic, and what can we do to bring them back into the workforce? How can we create environments that are mom-friendly? So with that, my first question, I'm going to, shoot to Amy. Amy, what do you see as the greatest challenges and the greatest opportunity? So let's be fair here, challenges and opportunity for mothers in the workplace right now, post-pandemic. What are we up against?
I think the biggest challenges for mothers in the workplace are similar to what they were before the pandemic, but only exacerbated. There was a childcare shortage in America before the pandemic, and we have lost something like 30 to 40% of childcare providers in the past 2 years. So there's even fewer options for childcare than there were before the pandemic. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges. It's something that has always held women back in the workplace because, for better or worse, women remain the primary caretakers in families.
And affordable childcare, you might add, too, which complicates it even more.
Of course. My company is named The Riveter after Rosie the Riveter, which, is the iconic
That's right.
legend of the American woman who went to work during World War II. And at that point in time, America actually subsidized childcare because we needed women to go build ships and build tanks. And so we created childcare facilities and then subsidized private childcare facilities. And I think that's something that we could endeavor to do again, whether it's through the government or private companies. So I think that is really the biggest challenge. And I think a second challenge is, as companies decide to bring people back into the office, women who have relied on the flexibility of working in the home, if they're now back in the office, that creates challenges just in terms of logistics, again, with childcare, but then other logistics as well. I think some of the biggest opportunities, I think there are really a lot of opportunities. I think now is really a time where we could reset gender equity and the way we think about it in the workplace. One simple way to do that could be saying, we don't believe that women are the primary caretakers, and things we can do to reflect that are offer parental leave at companies and encourage both men and women to take that parental leave. Men need to be involved from day zero, and we need to show that in society for people to really embrace that. And that will have such long lasting consequences as the way we look at gender in the workplace.
I got to tell you, Dave, that what a great way to segue to you, because as you and I being fathers here, you've doubled me. I have one little girl, you've got two children. React a little bit to what Amy said. Maybe it shouldn't be all thrust upon women. No, in fact, I would argue it shouldn't be. What do you think about that? How do you react to that? But also, I'd like to ask you to think about something else. It's clear that there's a full-on war for top talent out there. And a high percentage of the best professional candidates are working moms. Isn't that amazing? We're now saying that like the really, really strong candidates are women. Dave, you represent a leading fertility company. Can you tell us how you differentiate yourselves as a supportive employer to moms and working parents? And is there an ROI that makes this good for business? So, first, reacting to Amy's comments about maybe it shouldn't all be on the backs of women, but also then tell me about your business and what you all do there from an ROI perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Johnny. And I think this is such a great forum. We're really excited to be part of this. When I listen to what Amy's saying and some of the statistics, Johnny, even that you talked about at the beginning here, I totally agree. I think it's not just women. We look at it as parents, right? And what parents have to do to be able to be successful in the workplace and be successful at home. And a lot of that is for us is a cultural foundation, right? So we continue to invest as a company in our women in leadership programs. It's kind of an award-winning affinity group within the company that gives women and men who participate as well a platform to talk about some of those issues that allow women and men to kind of thrive within the company, but particularly focusing on those issues that are disproportionately affecting women. It also then goes beyond that to talk about the opportunities within our Leaders of Color employee network, within our Rainbow network. We have a whole host of kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion groups, and a company has to have that cultural foundation in order to allow all of those groups to be successful. And then you incorporate into that some of the issues that Amy's talking about with regard to some of the challenges that women have found in the workplace. And I think, as you mentioned, look, it's well documented that the pandemic disproportionately affected women, and they often shoulder, unfortunately, too much of the responsibility for caring for children, for caring for parents, for caring for kids with disabilities, and a company has to lead by example there. When we went into the pandemic, we launched global work policies that actively created an environment that was more flexible for people to be able to work, to be able to take care of some of these responsibilities. And these policies were in the works before the pandemic. I think we saw this shift happening before the pandemic, and the pandemic just accelerated. And it really brought it to the forefront where we had to do that. We had to communicate it actively. That's another important piece. As a company, we've got a platform to talk to 600, 700, 800 people all at once. And so that regular communication about finding what actually is going to work for employees, what works for teams, what works for managers is really important. The other thing I'd mention, you talked a little bit about the war for talent. And look, we're a biomedical company in Boston where there's hundreds of biomedical companies. And you can pretty much be blindfolded and wave your arm and hit another company that wants to attract the same employees that we've got. And so we look at not only how do we help and support employees that are managing their families, but how do we attract and support parents that want to have a family? As an infertility company, we're at the tip of the spear on that front with the patient advocacy groups. We offer comprehensive insurance coverage for couples that want to go through family building, that need coverage for infertility, because it's not uniformly covered in this country. We know that IVF is increasingly an important benefit. 68% of millennials take coverage of IVF into their decision making when they're thinking about where to go and work. And we hear stories about people that take part-time jobs at Starbucks in addition to their professional life so that they get coverage for infertility. And we're out there trying to actively promote, some of those coverage decisions. We've been successful in Colorado. Governor Polis signed a bill just this week, which provided insurance coverage for IVF. Picks up about 750,000 people that didn't have coverage for IVF that will now have access to that coverage. So it's not just the employees that have a family, but also how do we support an environment that those employees that want to build their family, and that's a big part for us. So you kind of ended the question with a return on investment on business. I'm not sure we look at it that way. I think we look at it as a return on investment for our employees, a return on investment for the patients that are out there that need our therapies. And if we do those things right, then the return on investment for business just naturally follows along.
No, listen, Dave, I got to tell you, I'm glad you clarified that. But let me tell you, from the perspective of someone who's represents a profession who's who's charged with, I should say, finding talent for organizations in this war, we need you to do what you do. Here's a reality, and people don't think about this. The stats are almost unbelievable. Americans stopped having children in meaningful numbers in the year 2000. So the American birth rate has been on a steady decline now for 2 decades. And during the pandemic, it dropped by 4% in the year 2020, the American birth rate. So while, yes, we have to think of things necessarily as an ROI for business, in a knowledge-based economy, you need people. And frankly, we have fewer people in America right now and fewer people having children. And therefore, we have a real problem with replenishing our work supply, our worker supply. So Amy is shaking her head. She knows
Well,
this is
I mean, I feel like in America, we haven't grasped the concept that children are a public good. And
right.
part of that public good is being able to grow and sustain our economic strength, which is not a
Period.
bad thing to talk about, right? That's something that we want.
That's
And so, to treat children as a public good, you have to believe in their care, in their existence,
Yes.
and all of those things really matter. And I think that it's not all on private companies. It needs to be on the government as well, as you just mentioned Governor Polis. But there's so much more we could be doing.
That's right. Yeah, and anything that we do, any barriers we put in place to people having children, as Amy just alluded to it, hurts our country, right? Ultimately, from a competitive standpoint, we have to ensure that we remove barriers to childcare, affordable childcare, et cetera. So that segues me to Blessing for a second. She's been sitting here patiently. Blessing, you run a large community that really, really digs into the impact of the caregiving crisis on women and families, while examining both short-term and long-term solutions to ease the burden on stressed out working parents. And we can't underscore, all of us now are talking about mental health, right? There are implications for parents who can't figure out how to provide childcare for their children.
Absolutely.
They can't bring their full selves to work. Let's talk about it, right? What are you hearing from mothers about what they are needing in a return to work policy? Yes, most companies have said we are returning to the workplace. And what are the obstacles in creating equitable offerings and solutions?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you. This is I'm nodding my head to everything Amy said, because we have been speaking to moms. Whether it's Mother Honestly or the Riveter, we've been speaking to moms before the pandemic, and we know that before the pandemic, 93% of moms were burned out. So moms were already looking forward to leaving the workforce before the Great Resignation. I'm like, I don't know why this is news, because we were already burned out. We were stressed. We were exhausted. And quite frankly, we were literally raising our hands and no one was listening. And then COVID came along. And finally, everyone realized, wow, women have actually been doing too much. We've been doing too much at home. We've been doing too much in the workplace. And maybe it's time we reset everything and say, look, is there a way for not just women, but men to come together to figure out a way to work together at home and in the workplace? And that's really the premise for Mother Honestly, which is how do we get women and men to flourish at home? How do we build, successful homes? Because if you're not successful at home, there's no way you can be successful at work. And until we start having this equity discussion at home, it's going to be very hard to achieve that equity discussion at work, which is why one of the biggest things that we've talked about very recently is how do we get men to parent out loud in the workplace? Because until we make this, an issue for men, we've been talking to ourselves for too long. That's one of the things that we've started doing at Mother Honestly is, look, we need to stop talking to ourselves, which is why, I'm just very excited to see, a very diverse group here. It's not just, finally, I'm excited. I'm not just talking to other women. I'm talking to men. so, how do we parent out loud? How do we make sure that it's okay for a dad to say, you know what, we really can't have this meeting at 4 p.m. because I have to go pick up my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we get men to do more laundry? Can we get a leader in the workplace to say, hey, have you done laundry this week?
I'm good. I can offer a class on how to fold clothes. I'm in.
Me too.
How do we
I grew up with a dad who did all the laundry and packed all the lunches because my mom worked too.
Thank you, Amy. Me too.
I love it. And I think that
it mattered.
We need to share the stories. We need to make it okay for us to share the stories in the workplace. Because, what we've seen is that the workplace never did work for women in the first place. It wasn't designed for us. And we forced our way in. We went out there, got great degrees, MBAs, PhDs. We worked hard. We even tried, to act like men and be authoritative and do all those different things. And we found that none of it worked. And so I think the question we need to start asking ourselves is why? Why didn't it work? And I think one of the biggest reasons is because we've just always assumed, right, that women would continue to do this work, that we will continue to provide childcare, that we will continue to clean the house and wash the dishes and do all these different things. And so we need to start having conversations that goes both ways, not just for women, but also for men. Because I think women have sort of like reached across to sort of go from the home to the workplace, and men are yet to do the same. And I think that's why we keep having this imbalance. And so we need to start having these conversations with men. I think that's where we start, is parenting out loud in the workplace.
Well, Blessing, I got to tell you, and I'm sure Dave is nodding here, and he may even chime in here, but I love the diversity on the screen, this panel here together, because sometimes we do talk to each other about it's all women talking about women's issues, all men talking about men's issues, all blacks talking about black issues, and we all need to talk with each other. We need to expand the conversation so that we can be allies. We can be more empathetic in our approach. I can't pretend to be a woman, but what I can do is be more empathetic toward women in the workplace. But part of that is if you don't tell me, if you don't have a conversation with Dave and I and say, let me tell you what we're experiencing, like experience work through my lens, right? Then you can't expect us to do it. So David, I saw you getting ready to chime in there because I know this is you, right?
Right. Yeah, well, thank you. So, I mean, you also have to change the type of conversation that people have, right? I mean, we've got to get out of this 1950s mentality of job A is more important than job B. Right. I mean, the reality is job A and job B are equal, and it doesn't matter where it is in the organization, but you've got to get away from that conversation at home and to a certain extent in the workplace, that because a job pays more or a job is at a different level, that person has to be at work longer. It's not that way anymore. We don't see that in the diversity in our company, and every job is equal and is equally important. And that has to carry over into that conversation at home too. So you can get out of that trap of you've got to come home and take the kids because I've got to, staff a board meeting. And I think that's really important.
But I got to tell you, Amy, so I want to segue to you because I see you itching, but I also have a question for you. Moms are superheroes when it comes to pivoting. They've had to, by nature, you're talking about something that wasn't built. We men weren't built for this. I like to say that. And at the Riveter, you call it pivoting and riveting, which I love, right? As many of us are pivoting again, perhaps back into a formal workplace, What advice do you have for moms in transition? Because it's happening, right? There are
Yeah.
companies every day announcing that they want their moms to come back to the workplace, maybe differently than they did in the past, maybe not
Yep.
Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, but they are coming back. What can employers do to help in this transition?
I think the best thing that employers can do to help with this transition is be flexible. I mean, I think what we learned, whether we believed it or not before the pandemic, and some people did and some people didn't, is that we can work remotely. And I understand the value of being in the office. I think that we will live in a hybrid world. But I do think that employers need to recognize that everyone's situation has changed and some people are able to perform better with more flexibility. There is no reason that we need to be at a desk from 9 to 5. We created the world when the internet did not exist. It does now. And so, we can be flexible with even our work hours. So I have 4 little girls who are 7, 6, 4, and 2. So I do 3 shifts really during the day. I work really early in the morning when they're asleep. Then I'm with them for breakfast. Then I have a big chunk of work while they're at school. Then I try to spend a couple hours with them. And then I do another shift in the evening. And for me, that works, right? And that flexibility allows me to get it done, to work really hard, and to be with my children. And so I think when we accept that flexibility can work, then and we embrace it, then we're all in a better place. Some people want to be in the office every single day and they want to be there from 9 to 5. But other people want different scenarios. And I think it's okay that if we're working somewhat asynchronously to just acknowledge that and embrace it.
Amy, you mentioned something that I must talk about just for a second here. Is this idea, in times past, sort of pre-pandemic, we referred to work-life balance. Well, I never believed in the concept. I don't know how you have balance in life on more than 1 or 2 days in a row, right? So we've begun to talk about here at SHRM work-life integration. And what you described, which was brilliant, I've put together 3 or 4 shifts, and so this is stage 1 of my day, this is stage 2, et cetera, for responding to the nuances of one child versus another child's needs, right? It is just brilliant. I've never heard anyone articulate it that. So for our audience, once again, can you just, Dave, I got a question coming for you, but I want to know, you said you call this 3 shifts or 4
Three
shifts?
shifts. I do 3 shifts, and I do 2 shifts with my kids. And it's interesting because I really encourage companies to embrace systems like this where they can and roles that they can, because I am a mother who walked with my feet. So I was a lawyer for a decade. And after I had my second daughter, I worked for a great company, but one that demanded I was at my desk from 8:30 to 5:30. And with a commute, I did not see my children because little kids sleep a lot. And so, I decided to create my own scenario, and this is what I built. And I built a company with this ethos. And before the pandemic, we had 120 employees, and kind of, I was somewhat flexible as a boss. I wish I'd been more flexible now that I understand what it means. But there was this, we didn't have meetings before 10 a.m. because people were dropping their kids off at school or whatnot. But just this idea that creating shifts, it works for people. And I think we all have online calendars, so you can tell people where you are and when you're available. And we can overcome this road bump to make that work.
Blessing, you were going to jump in. I saw you. Do you want to add anything to this whole concept of workplace and work, what we call, work-life integration?
I think somebody asked me this just yesterday, and I said, whether it's work-life balance, work-life harmony, work-life integration, I think the reality is that we just need a work-life plan. Everybody needs their own unique work-life plan, where that is, I'm going to be, working from home today, or I will be, working from
Speaking
the
of, I
office
see your little one
tomorrow.
there. That's
And
great.
and speaking of flexibility, right? He had a fever the entire week, and so just the ability to be home and be able to check on him and give him his medication and have him lay back down while I finish up my work, that's powerful. And I think that what I'm worried about as we go back into the office, Johnny, is that one, we are now going to have a much more wider shift between men and women, because men are going to go back to work and women are going to fight to keep working remotely. And so what's going to happen? Women will continue to do the larger share of the caregiving work. Women will continue to do the larger share of the domestic duties. Women will continue to lag behind mentally and in terms of their well-being behind men. And so I think that we really need to start thinking holistically about how we're going to make this return to the office work for women. And I'm not seeing enough conversation about this. And it's really, really scary for me because I have 4 kids. And I'm going to tell you the truth. I can't work if I don't have childcare. So work needs women, but women need childcare. So we need to figure that out.
I love it, Dave. Listen, Dave, that's the question for you then. How can employers best support this progress? We have made progress and we've lost some ground as a result of the pandemic on a lot of fronts, right? And what advice would you give employees to best advocate for a more supportive working environment for working parents? How can employees initiate the conversations? Because sometimes we sit around and we complain about something, but we don't do anything about it. The question for you is, how can employees initiate conversations with their employers around what is available for mothers in the workplace?
Yeah, and I'll make 3 points on that front, but maybe just to kind of react to, some of what Blessing was just talking about, which I really agree. I mean, 2 years ago, we didn't know what Zoom was. We didn't know what Microsoft Teams was. People maybe had a camera built into their computer, but people didn't have external cameras or little glow rings or any of the other tools that allow us to do virtual conversations. And so companies are going to need to dive into that technology space in order to continue to find ways to build the affinity that's so important for any sort of group to work, right? You've got to be able to have that creative juice as well as that productive juice into the system. I mean, I think as our company's been as productive as ever because we're getting a lot of people contributing in a lot of different ways that didn't exist before. And we really didn't miss a beat as a result of the pandemic. But we've got to start to look at what the future is going to be so that we make sure we don't lose that creative juice that you get when you sit in a room together. I mean, I can remember being on conference calls where everybody else is in the room and you're the one guy on the star phone. And it's impossible to follow a conversation. A lot of that's gone away now. So it's much more open for people to be able to participate. We just have to make sure we don't lose some of that creativity and find tools to continue to drive that creativity. I think about 3 things when I think about what employers can do in this area. First, I think you got to have policies. You got to have a responsive culture that attracts and retains women and really, frankly, all employees from an inclusive point. It's not enough just to have a policy on the books that says you're going to be inclusive. You got to lead. And I think, EMD Serrano does that. We're out front working with advocacy groups to lead and drive change in the community that we already see working for us internally. Take a look at fertility benefits, for example. That's kind of the second point. We need to work to demystify the benefits. We've got to get away from being anxious about talking about sperm and eggs, right? And that's something that people just don't want to talk about. But when you talk about infertility benefits, that's got to be part of the conversation. And a lot of employees don't know how to have that conversation with their employer. Or there was the stigma for women that if I go and I talk to my employer about fertility benefits, they're going to think that I want to get pregnant and have a family and that I'm going to be less productive, and that's going to limit my opportunity at the company. I think EMD Serrano's done away with that sort of culture, but that really exists. And I see that going state to state and talking about fertility coverage, that's still a challenge. And there's an opportunity for companies like EMD Serrano to be an example of how to have those conversations. And then finally, I would say that employees kind of building on that have to be comfortable with having those conversations, and they need the tools to know how to have those conversations about what their benefit design is. We know they're trying to look at it from a perspective of an employee that might be moving from company A to company B, and what are the benefits I'm moving into. But a lot of employees don't want to move. They want just benefits that are responsive to their needs. And so we work with groups like Resolve, which is the National Infertility Association, with groups like March of Dimes, to make sure that there are tools out there for kind of a coverage at work toolkit. So if you're an employee, you need a benefit change, you know how to have that conversation with your employer to kind of drive meaningful change. Chances are, if I feel that there needs to be a benefit change, there's 20 other people within the company that feel that way as well. And in having a culture where you are supportive of those sorts of conversations really leads to inclusive benefit design, which really helps tackle, some of the issues like infertility, which can be a difficult conversation.
So, David, you've mentioned something. I want to actually throw this out to the entire group, and then Blessing, I have a question for you that I'd like to follow up with. But you've used the word culture a lot. And as we all know, that was such a soft word historically. Like, no one talked about culture, not serious business people. But it is the word, right? And one of the struggles that we have is so much of this has been about rules, has been so, you've got to do this, and equality. If I offer it to person A, then I have to offer it to person B. I literally have had a situation here at SHRM. We have 500 or so employees in our headquarters office, and I had an employee who said our office hours pre-pandemic were 8:30 to 5:30. I can't drop off my kid until 9 o'clock. That's just the available childcare offering that I have in my area, and it starts at 9 o'clock, which means I can't get here until 9:30. Well, we said, fine. You'll get here at 9:30, and you have to cut your lunch short or stay longer because she's also got to leave early to pick the kid up by its closing hours. In any event, then we had another employee, not a man, but another woman, who said, well, wait a minute, we have to be treated equally here. So if she gets to come in at 9, I get to come in at 9. And we said, no, that's not the way it works. We are into equity. There's a big difference. We want equal opportunity, but we don't have to treat everyone equally, because in doing so, and that's that very subtle but important distinction between equality and equity. We want all to have equal opportunity, but we don't have to treat you equally. It doesn't make sense, as Amy pointed out, for you to have a meeting at 8:30 in the morning when you know it's going to disproportionately impact just one employee. Why do that? Why not move it till 10? So would you all react to this idea? You've got to build that into your culture, where every employee, not just HR, not just a CEO, is saying to people, stop. All of your employees should say, why are we doing this to people and impacting even it's one employee in our workforce? This is a cultural thing. No, Amy, David?
I mean, I absolutely think so. And I think to make it something that's a cultural thing, you not only have to weave it into your company values, you have to live it, right?
Yes.
So there's the value, and then there's a tactical piece of it as well. And that could be, as a team coming up with group meeting times 3 times a week that work for everyone, which I would argue also make you a more efficient company, because then you don't overmeet, which is what we all do. So if you limit the amount of meeting time, you can't overmeet. But I think it's really important because, there is a sense, right? Like, we know that working mothers have had a really hard time, but that doesn't mean that women without children should have to take on more of a burden, right? And so you need that idea of equity, which is that we don't all start at the same place, but we all want to arrive at the same place. And so how do we make that happen? And I think it's a mix of values and then tactics.
That's right. Blessing? You're the expert.
I mean, we have employees now, and we work asynchronously, and it's all about, a target. Everyone has a target, and as long as we're meeting those targets, we pretty much don't care how and when you get your job done. But at the same time, like Amy said, we have days where we have meetings, and everyone has agreed to those times. And so we've committed to being there. And so in my mind, and the way that I think as we come out of this COVID sort of workforce into this post-COVID world, can we start to think about how to make the workplace work in a way that allows everyone to live their best life, right? So whether that is a work plan for a team, right? It doesn't have to be the entire SHRM team, right? It could just be, the tech team are only going to be working, 2 days in the office and 3 days from home. And that's because it works for them, because maybe they're doing their sprints during the times that they are not in the office. I'm just making it up. Right. And so I think we are now at a point where everything needs to sort of be customized to the employee in a way that allows that employee to thrive. And so that's where the idea of an individual work-life plan comes in, or a team work-life plan, where we've all agreed that we are not going to have meetings on Fridays, and that's okay. So that means that, that single mom and that, man, right? There's no argument about equity at this point. We've all agreed that we're not having meetings on Fridays. So I think it really comes back to the company, right? If we have a family-friendly culture, or if we have a family-friendly policy that allows teams and managers to sort of dictate or sort of come up with the rules of their operation, I think we're probably going to fare much more better, because Google cannot come out and say, whoa, 50,000 or 100,000 employees, you all are now working from home on Fridays. It probably won't make sense, right? But a section of Google could say, you know what, we're going to work from home Monday and Fridays and come to the office Tuesday to Thursdays. So I think, back to Dave, I think this is where, for a company that probably cannot operate 100% remotely, which is what I push for, is if you can operate remotely, please do so. And if you can't, push it back to your managers, push it back to the directors, let them own it and say, you know what, we have come back with a teamwork plan for how we're going to operate for the next 6 months. It doesn't need to be set in stone. It doesn't need to be a forever plan. It is just, for now, this is how we're going to operate. And the team has already bought into this plan.
Yeah. We talk about flexibility and agility. Well, here it is, right? You want to be agile. This is the way you do it. David?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a diverse company in sort of operations, right? So we have research and development facilities. We have people working in labs. We have people that are, the essential of the essential that have to be on site. We kind of redefined that in the pandemic of everybody's essential, but there are some people that are in the manufacturing space within the company that have to be on site, and others that had more flexibility to work from home. And I think about how you've got to make it simple too. You've got to have a simple mentality and not overcomplicate it by putting all of the structure in place. I remember we went through this interesting exercise with masks, right? Every company was trying to figure out, how do we deal with masks? And, at the leadership team level, when we were talking about that, there initially the reaction is, well, people that have to be in the office every day, that work on the line, they're going to be working close to people and they have to have a mask on. But people that sit in an office, well, gee, maybe they can take their mask off. Well, you know who that was? It was like the senior leadership that got to take their mask off, and the hourly employees on the line that had to wear a mask. And so that idea was quickly discarded because of this idea to treat everybody and everybody's job the same. And so if you're the CEO and you're sitting in your own office by yourself, you still have to wear your mask because that's what the guy in the line's doing. So you create that environment of equity, but then we also have objective-based, settings, and teams and employees have their objectives, and they have the flexibility, I think, at EMD Serono to accomplish those in the manner that's fit for them to be able to accomplish that objective. And that now includes remote and includes a lot of other options to achieve the goal, regardless of how you do it. And there's no cookbook about how to do it.
So I'm going to be a little provocative here, not surprising, because I'm going to throw this out to you. So far, you've had softballs, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to challenge us all to think about, and it was spurred on by David's comment about sort of how we treated people in offices when we were talking about masks versus how we treated people who worked in cubes otherwise. Listen, here's one of the challenges, and we don't talk about it a lot. Somewhere between 48 to 52% of the workforce never had the luxury of working remotely during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, flexibility is harder. We're sitting here, and I heard you, Blessing, make the comment that, if everyone can work remotely, well, you can't do that in retail. You can't do that in manufacturing. There are a lot of jobs, and we have to acknowledge it, most of the U.S. economy cannot afford for a fully remote workforce. This is really a luxury of people who are in what we call the knowledge economy, who are better educated, et cetera. And we know that doesn't reflect all of America. So one of the things I want us all to kind of just chip in a little bit on is, how can we incorporate this flexibility? Amy is a lawyer. She can build a business where her people can largely work remotely. But Walmart, with its 2.2 million employees in America, can't do that. So we do have to figure out how to do that. I thought about that during the pandemic when most of us were shutting our offices down. Those people were still going to work. Mm-hmm. And we wanted them at work because that's where we got our groceries. And many of us, that's where we got our medicine when our families were sick with COVID. They were at the Walgreens, the Walmart, et cetera. So talk about that a little bit, because we do have to factor that in.
I mean, I'm not an expert, but I can offer my opinions. Blessing, do you want to go? Blessing, do you want to go first?
I mean, I can go first. So my background is in chemical engineering. I was on the shop floor for 15 years. So okay. I completely understand, that there are some professions like mine where you have to be boots on ground, hard hat, safety glasses, all of those things. And so you can ask those people to work from home. But then what can you do to support that employee? I think that's where we need to start thinking about policy and, whether it's employer policies or policies, within our society. Can we provide childcare for that employee so that he or she can actually bring their full self to work, right? So we're talking about reimagining the workplace. And so, what is it about childcare that makes it so hard for us to solve? I think that's where I'm always like, why is this a big deal? Because that's the single most important reason why a lot of employees, whether they're working remotely or in person, cannot work. So I think the biggest issue, the biggest problem that employers can solve for employees today is childcare. But back to you, Jenny, a lot of employers do not want to solve the childcare issue because, quote unquote, not everybody have kids. And I call, I don't want to say the word here because it really doesn't make any sense. And so when we look at, so looking at that from that lens, right? What are the things? What are the low-hanging fruits? The first one is childcare. The second is paid parental leave, and making sure that men also take their paid leave.
Yes.
And the third is flexibility. Yes, that employee needs to come to the workplace. But what about if he or she needs to go pick up their kids at 4 p.m.? Right? Can we look at things like job sharing and make sure that these employees have a backup plan at work so that if something happens, somebody else is able to pick up that shift?
Amy?
Well, I was just going to thread on to what Blessing was saying in terms of flexibility and being able to pick up your child if you need to. You can create shifts that work around school hours, right? Like our school hours, again, like we base this 9 to 5, like school is still based on the agrarian calendar, which most Americans are no longer farming and don't need their children to go work on the farm, but we still base our school schedule on that, which makes it really hard for parents. So not only creating shifts around working parents, but also then not changing shifts. In a lot of shift positions, schedules are constantly changed. Things are mixed up. It doesn't allow for any predictability, and that's impossible for parents. So allowing for consistent shifts, I think, is really important as well.
Dave?
Johnny, maybe just if I can jump in here too. I think we need to be careful that we don't assume that companies know how to do this, right? We talk about these things and it's really important. But then when it goes to an HR manager, you probably know this better than anyone, when it goes to an HR manager or it goes to a senior leadership team and they say, okay, we want to be more responsive. How do we do that? Then there's like crickets in the room because they don't know how to do it. We learned a valuable example in that area with a program we have called Embracing Cares. We're a healthcare company. We help patients, but we recognized that the people taking care of those patients are just as important as the patient themselves. And we know, and we've got documented evidence that show that caregiving is a huge issue in the workplace. It's not just childcare. It's care for someone that has to have an operation or an elderly parent, and you've got to, as a company, have policies in place that allow for that flexibility to be a caregiver and to be able to work. And we've created toolkits that are out there, and we work with groups like the Mass Business Roundtable to talk to other employers that all raise their hand and say, yeah, we know our employees have caregiving issues too, but we don't know what to do to put into place to respond to that. So, it's probably a natural extension of this call is to start to think about where the toolkits are and where the resources are for companies to be able to implement and use best practices to talk about some of the things we're mentioning here today.
Well, I can tell you, there's one place I know that's really good at this work, and it's called SHRM. I know I had to do it. But seriously, that's the business that we are in, is our job is to ensure that work works for all. And we do provide toolkits on our site, and it's not just for HR professionals, although that's the overwhelming majority of our members, but a lot of people who are running businesses, who are people managers, go to us to get resources for just that, because we do have, luckily, some real experience in removing barriers to ensuring that work works for all. So I have a final question, though, for all of you. It's clear that now more than ever, working parents need to feel seen, heard, and supported. All three, right? What gives you hope? Let's end on a really positive note. What gives you hope for progress for mothers in the workplace? And I'm going to start with David.
I think what gives me hope is looking at my twin daughters that are 17 and seeing how they embrace technology at school and knowing that that kind of technology exposure they're getting now is going to help them be better positioned when they transition into the workplace. So I think technology is going to be a great equalizer, and this next generation of people coming into the workforce is probably even more adept than we are at utilizing that technology to be successful.
Blessing?
I think, moms give me hope. We've been resilient even before the pandemic, and we continue to be resilient. We've seen more moms coming back into the workforce, and those that are not coming back into the workforce, are starting businesses, or recreating, their lives, right? They're redefining their lives. And those in the workforce are also demanding a better quality of life, right? Gone are the days when, it's so hard for moms to go in and request for a breastfeeding room, or, request for paid time off. So now, more moms have the tools and the resources to go out there and demand a better quality of life. So that gives me hope that at least we are now emboldened to talk more about this. And we also see a lot of men, right, as a result of the pandemic, now truly understand the pain of a working mother. And so it's all out in the open. And now it's not so hard to talk about those things. So that gives me hope.
And Amy, last word?
Last word, I mean, I think there are so many things that are hopeful. I think, on the corporate side, the pandemic pushed forward a conversation that I think would have taken another decade or 2 decades to really have
Totally.
about flexibility. And I think that benefits mothers. I think that we are seeing more women start and lead companies, and more mothers start and lead companies, which will benefit mothers because lived experience, I think, helps us shape and craft policies that work for mothers. So I think both of those things are really, really exciting. And I think, there's tons of opportunity. I think there are a lot of silver linings to this. And so I'm excited to see where we head.
Well, listen, thank you all. I tell you what makes me really excited about this and hopeful is that you've got 2 guys on here talking as well. The point that was raised in the beginning is you can't do this alone. You need allies. You need people who empathize. I can never be a woman, but I can sure as heck begin to understand it. So as women talk about this more, that's not just talking to women, they're talking with business leaders like me and David, and we can also be your champions in the workplace and make sure that this progress continues, into the future. So with that, we've reached the end of this session of It Starts With Mom Live. I'd like to first thank the March of Dimes for inviting me to be a part of this very, very important conversation. I frankly can't think of a whole bunch of things that are more important to talk about at this point. I'd like to thank Dave, Blessing, and Amy for an engaging, and I hope you all agree, thought-provoking discussion. And of course, we would not be here without our virtual audience, all of you out in sort of the world. Thank you for tuning in. I hope we've given you some valuable insights to take away. I wish you all a great day.
Great. Thank you.